Bernie Sanders was in Toronto over the weekend to give a speech on healthcare. Now, after the speech, there was a Q&A where Bernie gave this advice to Canadians.
Canadians are well known throughout the world as gentle and kind people. Be a little bit louder. Stand up and fight for what you have achieved and defend it. Look, I'm in politics and I get criticized every day. I'm sure the premier gets criticized every day. Nothing is perfect and people have different points of view about everything. But when you accomplish something significant, like guaranteeing health care to all people, stand up and defend that all over the world.
So as a Canadian, I think Bernie's right. While there is always room for improvement, Canadians should be louder about the things we've accomplished, especially when it comes to universal healthcare. Now, I'm going to show you a clip here from Bernie's speech where he gives a quick overview of how Canada got universal healthcare, but then I'm going to go a little deeper to help you understand that it was quite a struggle for us to eventually achieve it. But first, here's Bernie.
Closer to home, and I know you know this story, here in Canada in 1947, Tommy Douglas. So I gather you know who Tommy Douglas is. He was as you all know, the Premier of Saskatchewan. And in 1947, he introduced the Saskatchewan Hospital Services Plan, the first universal hospital insurance program in North America. In 1959, he announced a Medicare plan for his province, which became law a few years later, and as you all know, became the model for the Canadian healthcare system.
Okay, so there's your quick overview. Now, maybe it sounds like it was easy, but it wasn't. So I'm going to go deeper into exactly how Saskatchewan became the first area in North America to get universal healthcare. And to do so, I'll be quoting a fantastic summary of the events by CanadianDimension.com, and I'll link to their full article below the video. Universal state medical insurance was virtually the only major issue in the Saskatchewan provincial election of 1960. The organized medical establishment mounted a ferocious propaganda campaign fronted by the local College of Physicians and Surgeons with the support of the Canadian Medical Association, the American Medical Association, the local economic elite, and most of the media in the province. They amassed $100,000 for propaganda purposes, a tremendous sum in 1960, and far more than any party would spend in a Saskatchewan provincial election. Every household received printed propaganda, and advertisements flooded the radio and newspapers. Public meetings were held throughout the province and were addressed by prominent doctors and supporters, often under the auspices of local chambers of commerce and boards of trade. So understand that, much like in the US, the entire medical establishment was against a Medicare for All system, as was most of the media. Now, this next part here is going to sound all too familiar. There were denunciations of socialism, communism, quote-unquote socialized medicine, and the evils of compulsion. People would not be able to choose their own doctors. There might be compulsory abortion. State bureaucrats might commit people to mental hospitals. It was suggested that many doctors would leave the province and be replaced by inferior foreign practitioners. So, as an American, does any of that sound familiar? Now, despite all that, the CCF still won the election in a four-way race with 47% of the vote. So, everything's perfect, right? The CCF won the election on the basis of a Medicare for All system, but, of course, that wasn't the end of it. So, despite the fact that they won that election, the medical establishment, the business elite, the media elite, and the Liberal Party all teamed up to still try and prevent a Medicare for All system from being implemented. The initial purpose of the anti-Medicare campaign was to force the CCF government to go back on their election promise and stay out of the medical insurance field altogether. When it became clear that the CCF would do no such thing, the fallback position was trying to force them to water down government involvement, limiting it to subsidizing existing medical insurance schemes controlled by organized private medicine. Subsidized medical insurance controlled by organized private medicine. Does that sound familiar to you? It's essentially Obamacare. So even though the CCF won the election on a Medicare for All universal system, the forces that were fighting against them were still trying to force them to water it down to the point of an Obamacare system. Now, ultimately, they were able to fight against it, but they still had to deal with a doctor strike. It was the most polarized Saskatchewan battle of the 20th century, and it divided the population into warring camps, which brought the province to the brink of a civil war. The campaign, which included most of the local media, was based on outrageous lies about the intent of Medicare, racial slurs, red baiting, acts of violence, and threats of blood in the streets. The anti-Medicare campaign gave rise to a right-wing movement known as the Keep Our Doctors Committee. The KOD movement had many similarities to today's rabid Tea Party movement in the United States. It was composed of an active, ignorant, and misinformed rank and file, led by manipulative leaders with a right-wing political agenda. Prominent doctors and businessmen and leading lights of the local Liberal Party appeared on platforms with these fanatics. The interests behind the KOD were bent not only on stopping socialized medicine, but in ridding the province of quote-unquote socialism. So despite all the pressure before the election, all the pressure after the election, and even a doctor strike, the CCF was eventually able to implement their universal healthcare system. But it wasn't done alone. It was a concerted effort with a bunch of groups that all had the same goal in mind. This was made possible by the dedication of CCF rank-and-file activists and a dedicated core of socialists, trade unionists, agrarian radicals, and a small minority of courageous doctors who defied the ostracism of their colleagues. They built community clinics with the initial aim of employing doctors who defied the strike. It was the possibility that the community clinics might become really widespread and popular that really frightened the medical establishment. The same people who organized the community clinics also organized such groups as Citizens in Defense of Medicare and Citizens for a Free Press to counter the anti-Medicare propaganda. So in other videos, I've made the point that the most important thing is policy. So if you align with somebody on policy, whether it's other leaders, whether it's other groups, then that is the most important thing. It doesn't matter how you differ in maybe strategy or how you communicate that to people, but in the actual policy. Because then you all have your own strategies and how to get there, and you could eventually come together when needed on pushing forward how to actually achieve the policy you want. So whether you're part of the Democratic Socialists of America, whether you're a progressive within the Democratic Party, whether you want a People's Party or whatever it is, Green Party, whatever movement you're a part of, if you align on the policy, that's the most important thing. And also be aware that you should be open-minded to other strategies. So don't be closed-minded in your own way of doing things, because when the time comes, you may get to a point where you all need to align on a specific way to actually achieve the policy that you want. But in the meantime, be vocal and be focused on the actual policies that you want to get. Now, I want to end here on a clip from Bernie Sanders from that speech that he did in Toronto about really the most important point. And it kind of sums everything up here.
Point being here that real change, and the change in the UK and the change in Saskatchewan is very real change. It never happens from the top on down. Real change always happens from the bottom on up.